Welcome to the 23rd De Vries Vanderkooy Memorial Lecture. My name is Annemarie Toebos. I am the Director of Dutch and Flemish Studies in the Department of Germanic Languages. We normally have this lecture in the fall, so this is strange for us to be here on a spring night. Many of you attend this every year, and so this is a different occurrence. The next De Vries Vanderkooy Memorial Lecture will not be this fall. It will be in the fall of 2020. So in 2020, Dutch at the University of Michigan celebrates its 50th anniversary. So there'll be a series of events that culminate in a larger De Vries Vanderkooy event. And so that will be in 2020. Okay, so I want to first thank a few people and welcome everybody, welcome all my students. So to the Dutch students who are in my Dutch language classes, there's a sheet outside that you put your name on. The people from the Anne Frank course, from the Anne Frank cursus, they don't need to sign in. You are going to write a piece on this. You know what to do. Okay. So then I want to thank the faculty members that are here from around the university, different departments and schools and colleges. Thank you for all attending tonight. Also the members of the Dutch immigrant community that are always loyally here at this event. Thank you for being here, and also any other community members that might be attending tonight. Welcome. I want to thank, as always, the sponsors to this lecture series, and in particular want to talk a little bit about the diplomatic corps of the Netherlands and Belgium. So the general representatives of the Flemish government who are housed in New York City, they are loyal supporters of Dutch and Flemish studies here. So I want to thank them. And then also the Netherlands Embassy in Washington, D.C. that has been supporting this lecture series for years and years and are doing so again tonight. So thank you. And related to that, I want to welcome a special guest tonight, Consul Generaal or Consul General for the Netherlands in Chicago, Mr. Louie Piet. Thank you and welcome for being here. Dank u wel dat u hier bent. Yeah. We can applaud. And finally, I would like to welcome, and that is a last but not least, is Dr. Larry Gant, who is Professor of Social Work and Professor of Art and Design. Am I saying that right? And he is the reason that we have our speaker here tonight. He invited her in the fall, this past fall, to speak in the School of Social Work and connected me with the speaker, and then she came into my class on diversity in Amsterdam and changed my thinking. I realized I've been teaching the topic of the Redlight District all the way wrong. I came at it with all kinds of preconceived ideas about what prostitution was, and the first thing I learned is not to say prostitution, but to say sex work. And then lots of other sort of things started to dawn on me about how we have these set ideas of what something is, and even if you've studied it, you can still not truly know what it is. And it really gave me a sense of the importance of bringing people with experience to our campus to go beyond, I guess, what the scholarship or the theoretical knowledges you have of something, to include experiences on our campus. And so then my thought was, well, we need to find a bigger platform and give the speaker a bigger forum here. Also in line with the philosophy of the two men who are always commemorated in this series, that is Jan de Vries and Meindert Vanderkooy. This is called the De Vries Vanderkooy Memorial Lecture. They were two men that worked tirelessly on our campus to bring Dutch culture closer to the campus and knowledge about the culture. And so that is what the speaker tonight will do about her specific topic. That brings me to Bernice. So Bernice Severin is a social worker. She started her career in a center for drug addicts and the homeless called the Rainbow Group. Yes. And after that, she worked for the Amsterdam Coordination Point Against Human Trafficking. And that is actually the job that she will talk about today, the work she did for that center. Currently, she is actually not there anymore. She works for an organization called Veilig Thuis, which I guess ambiguously can mean safe home or safe at home. And this is a center, it's sort of a what did you call it again? Advice and Reporting Center for Domestic Violence. So in all these capacities, she's been a social worker working directly with people. And so that is what we're going to hear from her today, and especially what it was like to work with survivors of the human sex trafficking trade, or human sex work in the Netherlands. So I would like to ask Dr. Gant to say a couple more words about her work and the importance of her work for social work for the field and also for the University of Michigan. Dr. Larry Gant.
Hi, and thanks very much, Professor Tobash. It's great. I'm here, and I'm happy to be here. The other person who frequently goes undermentioned in all of this would happen to be my wife, Christiane, who in 2009 had the idea. She was born and raised in Berlin, Germany. And over here, while she was over here, she came here with friends and family at that time, shortly after the wall fell in Germany. As a former student of mine, and in some of my classes, my former student, now my wife, was always saying, you know, there are many solutions happening around the world, not simply in the US. The students here in social work are lovely, but they lack a sense of greater vision and complexity. Why don't we take them to see how other Western industrialized societies solve or address solutions in different kinds of ways? And so after a couple of years, I got tired and said, okay, you know what, let's go ahead and let's try this idea, this really great idea of yours, and we'll try it in two societies that we have some connections with, Amsterdam and Berlin. So for 3 years, my wife and I co-sponsored a team of undergraduates, but also a team of very sharp graduate students to engage in the work, to go to Amsterdam, to go to Berlin, and to work there with social workers who were working in various kinds of areas. At that time, we were looking at human trafficking. We were looking at the challenges with refugees, and we were also looking at the challenges of the ways in which these different societies address the issues of juvenile delinquency and those kinds of activities. We met lots of colleagues. I won't talk to you over much about how we came and how we made connections with ACM, except to say, and Bernice, except to say that one of the things that we were really challenged to do was to really get our students to see these individuals not as causes, but as people. And so in the Netherlands, for example, we did policy work and policy education, but it was also important for us, for us to let our students know that these were human beings with ambitions, with challenges, with fears, and with families. And so what could we do? So in working to change the perception of students from a cause to human beings, we engaged one of the programs, ACM, and we said, we're here for just a short period of time. What can we do with the people who are at the facility? And Bernice will talk more about that, I would imagine. And she was one of the staff who said, well, you know what? How about something where it's a little bit different, a little bit unusual, but how about a beauty and fashion kind of activity, where the women wanted to be just pampered. So what if you came and you did nails, you did makeup, you did a little massage, some baking, and some exercise classes. So how about that? Well, this was unusual because folks wanted to kind of do something that was cause-worthy with the women, right? And so treating them like human beings who wanted to be pampered and loved and who wanted for a time to forget that they were involved in this situation was a respite. Our students loved it. Bernice was really good with her other colleagues in saying, well, how about this? How about this? And let's kind of plan the program. It's a very Dutch thing to do, to plan the program several months in advance so that it goes very, very quickly. And so we learned to do that, and it was transformative. Mm-hmm. The students began to see these people in horrid situations and challenging situations as human beings. And for that, we owe our gratitude to Christiane, my wife, who suggested the connection, and for people like Bernice who said, yes, we can help. If only for a day or two, we can help because you would make a difference in the lives of the women and their children. And so began an acquaintanceship that developed into a friendship between Bernice, my wife Christiane, our granddaughter Amari, and myself as we bonded over causes, challenges, and it moved there from good eating and shopping, okay? So we continue to stay in touch because she's a social worker and we're social workers as well too. We invited her. So Christian's idea was to also say, you know, we should have exchanges, so we shouldn't just go over there. We should invite people from there here to the United States to present and to talk. And so last year, 2 years ago, we started to do that, and last year we invited Bernice to come to the States to present in social work, to present a different frame of social work and a different frame of thinking about social justice issues. And then Christian said, you know what, I know people over in Germanic studies, and also there's this really interesting person, Anne-Marie Tobosch, who's also in Dutch and Flemish. Could we make a connection there? We did. Bernice is here. Anne-Marie is very happy. That was the reason why, okay? All right, so as much as anybody, I owe this whole night to the dogged perseverance of my wife, Christian, who said, I have another idea, could we try it out, okay? So thank you, Christian. Okay. Okay. Finally, I appreciate and I resonate with the considerable support that's in the room this evening, and I simply want to say that as a faculty member of the #1 School of Social Work in the United States, the University of Michigan School of Social Work takes the approach to social justice and global work very, very seriously, but we haven't always known the best way to do it. And so one of the responses that I had, thanks to Christian, was to just go on ahead and do it and bring people back and forth and act as if we know what we're doing and act as if we know that, oh, there's another world out there across from the Atlantic. And so we have done that. We are asked very, very often as the School of Social Work on campus to be the moral conscious, to talk about social justice and social equity issues when it's time for the university to respond to some kind of disadvantage, whether that's assaults, whether it's deaths, whether there's odd kinds of policies being passed. What should the response of University of Michigan be from a social justice from an ethical point of view? And often we are turned to shine a lamp, a perspective on those kinds of issues. So we look at and we ally with social justice warriors and social justice advocates. So we're really happy to do that with people like Bernice, who is a warrior and advocate in her own personage. And all of you probably know about Professor Tobosch, who is as much a social justice advocate as she is an amazing scholar and a wonderful teacher. So we are really, really honored on behalf of the School of Social Work to, work together to bring Bernice Severin here, and we hope that you enjoy her every bit as much as we have enjoyed her as well. In closing here, my other hat is also in doing art, and one of the quotes that I am really favored of and really interested in, especially for tonight, is a quote from James Baldwin, who said that the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. And so I think activities and processes like these are signature ways of looking at the answers that have been hidden by questions for too long. And so I'm looking forward to this in terms of my role as a social worker, but as someone who is a consumer and advocate of art, in using art to uncover these challenges and issues for discussion, for consideration and reflection. I'm honored to be here. Thank you so much. I'm turning it back over to Professor Tobosch, and thank you all from the School of Social Work. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Gant. So I would like to call up our Consul General for the Netherlands in Chicago, Mr. Louie Piet, who will say a few words. He's been our Consul General for about 3 years here. We know that facility for passports, and then there were no longer passports to be had, but now I understand we can get passports again. Dutch people in the room in Chicago. So let's applaud that we don't have to go to New York City. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let me put on my glasses, otherwise I cannot read my notes. Comes with age. Actually, I thought I could say a few words in Dutch here. Dat was goedenavond. How many people speak Dutch? Oh, where are all the students? Not so shy. Come on. No, but I'll do it in English for the benefit of the rest of the audience. like Annemarie said, I arrived in Chicago about 3 years ago. I think we met fairly soon thereafter. I can't remember exactly, somewhere in October or no, before October it was. And she told me about this lecture, and I said, okay, if you organize the lecture, I'll come. Because I think it's important. And I'll say a little bit more about that later. But for 2 years, it didn't work out. 1 year, I was on holiday, and the second year, last year, my daughter married. And she insisted that I was there in the Netherlands. So I missed it again. So this year, because it shifted to spring, it was easier, so I said, I'll come. Why would I want to be here and drive, 300 miles from Chicago to Ann Arbor to assist in this lecture? I think it's important that Dutch language and Dutch culture are better known particularly in the US, and for a particular reason. Our relations between the two countries go back more than 400 years. I won't delve very deep into history, but when Hudson went up the river that later carried his name, I don't know what it was called originally, I guess it had an Indian name, that's more than 400 years ago. He founded the old New York, New Amsterdam in those days. Between the Dutch and the Americans, there is the first salute, I think, that every American has heard of, the first recognition of the modern American state by the Netherlands. There was the first loan, less known probably, but the first money that was used to fund the revolution came from bankers in the Netherlands. And since then, the two countries went a long way. Strong relations in the economic field, and I won't go in, although it's my specialty, I won't go into the details there, but just one tiny bit, about 850,000 jobs in the US are directly related to the economic relations with the Netherlands. If we would pull out tomorrow, you would have almost 1 million people without a job. Close political relations, close cultural relations, and I won't speak about politics tonight. I don't think I'm saying something revolutionary when I say that the current times are not as easy as they were in the past. I think that our relations between the two countries have a depth and a width that is much broader than the one person who is currently in the White House or let's say, the issues of today that we may face. Why are these relations so strong? I think because they rest on common values. In the end of the day, it's that we share a number of values between the two countries that assure that we have remained friends for over 400 years. And these shared values come with knowledge of language and knowledge of culture. In the Netherlands, about 80% of the population speaks English. My wish would be that in the US, about 80% of the population, I won't finish my sentence. I mean, I have to be realistic. The Netherlands language and culture viewed from the perspective of the US, of course, is just but one. It's larger than many people think, by the way. It's not just that we're the 16th economy in the world and have those close relations, and therefore it would be very useful for some Americans to speak Dutch and to become acquainted. But since that's difficult, we chose to learn English rather than ask you, all Americans, to study Dutch. But it is important, and that's why I'm here. The number of students here is growing, I understand from Annemarie. This has been going on for 50 years. The faculty exists 50 years next year. So there is a history, and I'm absolutely sure that you will add another 50 years to that. Congratulations, and I will be here. I will not be here for the 50th anniversary, because by then I will have been transferred back to my home country. unfortunately, but I already wrote a note for my successor that he should be here by the end of next year when the 50th anniversary is celebrated. Thank you. And now I have to do something. Because the 50 years, I understand, or the 24 years of the Vries Vanderkooy lezing are assembled here in this plaque. Yeah. And I don't know whether Bernice knows or not, but her name is on it as well. Yeah. And there is one space left for next year. So I think I have to give it to you ceremoniously.
Exactly. Thank you.
Congratulations. Welcome here and help us finding the common values and the common knowledge between the two countries. I got it. I'll put it in a safe place.
Okay. And here we go. Welcome, Bernice Severin. Thank you.
So welcome, everyone, and thank you that I've been invited to talk a bit about myself, about my profession, and about sex work in the Netherlands. And I'm really happy to see all of you here, which means that you are interested in the topic. So I will definitely do my best. The title of my presentation is Bright Lights and Windows, a look behind the curtain of Dutch sex work. Because I have noticed that there are different ideas about sex work in the Netherlands. And before I started working with sex workers, I was one of the people who had ideas about sex work that didn't respond with the reality. So first, I'm going to take you to a quick journey when it comes to my social work career, even though Dr. Gant and Dr. Tobosch told a bit about it already. We're going to have it about sex work in the Netherlands and a bit of information beyond the Redlight District. So, about me, my roots are in Suriname, and Suriname is a country in Southern America. I was born there, and my parents decided when I was 3 years old to go to the Netherlands. And at first, we lived in Amsterdam for almost 3 years. By the age of 6, I moved to Almere, which is a city not too far from Amsterdam. It's maybe 15 miles. And despite growing up in the Netherlands, I still carry my Surinamese roots. And that's my decision to become a social worker has everything to do with my background. Because at the age of 17, I had a funeral of a family member. And that's when I realized, like, I think social work might be something for me. Because in my culture, we have a lot of rituals and ceremonies when a loved one passes away. And the goal is that after all the rituals and the ceremonies, you have mourned enough. So after the funeral, you should be ready. You're done mourning and ready to continue your life. But what I saw with my family members, it was a cousin of me, and I saw that my aunt and my uncle were struggling a lot after the funeral. And even though my family, we are a tight family, we have a lot of family members as well, even though we tried to solve it on our own, I could see them struggle a lot. And that was the moment that I realized that someone from outside, a professional, someone with a totally different view, might help, could give new insights, different advices, just someone outside of the network. And that was exactly the moment that I decided I want to be that person. I want to help people who are stuck, who can't look beyond what they know. And I want to be that person to help them see new or other solutions or better solutions other than they are used to. So I decided to start in Amsterdam, because there's a lot of work in Amsterdam, of course. a lot of different people in Amsterdam as well. And I found an internship at first, but later I worked there at the Regenbooggroep. And translated, it's the Rainbow Group. And it's a homeless shelter, a facility for homeless people and drug addicts. And that is where I became to learn, basically, and that's something I carried through my whole social work career, to accept people the way they are. Even if they are not someone you would talk to normally, or someone you would pass by normally on the street, just accept them and help them how and when they want, like a client-based approach. And that is something I take with me through my whole career, because everyone is different. And some people just want to drink a cup of coffee with you and talk, and they don't want your advice because they're not going to do anything with it, or maybe they're not ready to do anything with it at that time. But it's most important that you are there and that you can help them with at how they can use your help best. And if that is only a cup of coffee or some time so that they can talk and you listen to them, then that's what it is. After I graduated the School of Social Work, I wanted to do something different. And most of my clients at the Rainbow Group were males, and I decided to work with females. So I went for this interview, the shelter, and I thought I was going to work with women and children, just a regular shelter for women and children who became homeless. And during the interview, they told me, well, this is a shelter for victims of human trafficking. They didn't advertise with it, so it was quite a surprise for me. And I thought at first, well, I do know a bit about sex work, and I think I can handle it. I just stepped in, open, pretty blunt as well. And then a whole new world opened up for me. I began to know more about the Redlight District, about all the happy people over there and the happy women standing behind the windows, and everyone was laughing and it was fun. He had a lot of clubs. And I began to learn that there's a different world behind it. So after 6, almost 7 years, it was time for me to leave the shelter. I had the best time there with the women and their children, also with other organizations who provided a lot of programs for them to work, to go to school, to study. And I will never forget, I have this phrase, and I don't know who came with it or where it comes from, but the phrase is, we all smile in the same language. And that is something that I saw frequently, almost all the time at the shelter, because sometimes women were brought in and they felt really hopeless. They were exhausted. They had to get used to a new day and night rhythm because they were used to stay up at night and sleep during the day. And what we did was take them along immediately, actually. They didn't like it. They didn't always like that. But immediately with our daily program, and I have seen women from different countries who didn't speak each other's language. And sometimes I couldn't speak their language as well. And we made our own language that was English, Dutch, French, name it. But what I saw is that we all smiled in the same language. And I saw women from Africa, from Hungary, name it, and their children. And all they needed was a smile or a helping hand. They didn't need language or words. And that's, yeah, I will never forget that. I will never forget those moments that I sat at the table and we were eating Mongolian / Hungarian food because they cooked together. And it was amazing. Words can't describe how special that was for me. But still, I wanted a new challenge, and that's when I ended at Veilig Thuis, Safe Home, in September 2017. And that's a whole new type of work for me as well. I'm more a case manager, So I'm still involved with the people and to make sure that they get the right help, but it's not as close as the social work I used to do at my previous jobs. But all the experiences and everything I learned, I took it with me, and it helps me to do this work in the best way I can. So let's have it talk about sex work in the Netherlands. You might know or you might not know that it's the oldest profession in the world. And in the Netherlands, it was always tolerated, but never fully accepted. Since the year 1300, people were like, okay, we tolerate it because it can protect women against rape, sexual assault. So as long as there are sex workers, other women might be safe. Since the year 2000, brothels are no longer prohibited, which means that it's legal to run a business in which you can hire sex workers. You do need a license, and there are some conditions that you need to respect, but it was legalized for the reason to fight against human trafficking and to protect sex workers. That was the main reason why they thought, okay, let's legalize it again. And since the year 2011, sex workers have to pay taxes over their income. In the Netherlands, they love taxes, so why not let them pay taxes as well, because we all have to do that. They have the legal protection just like everyone else, and which means they have access to healthcare, and they're eligible for unemployment and invalidity benefits. They also have their own union. So that's why I call it sex work and not prostitution, because it's a legal job. Here's a picture of the Redlight District as we know it, and as I knew it. The windows, you have the small canals, and on some evenings and days, it looks pretty nice. I mean, I see a lot of tourists, I see a lot of people walking through it, and they have a pretty good time. And the first couple of times I went there, I was having a pretty good time as well. I mean, it was new, I was curious, I did feel a little uncomfortable, but to me, it was like something that that was connected to Amsterdam and something that was really important in the Netherlands. Like you have Amsterdam and you have the Redlight District. So now I'm going to show you a short clip. Let's see if that works. I have it here.
The biggest misunderstanding about this is that people think that sex workers must open the door for every idiot that is approaching them. Like they don't have the same rights as any other human being in the world. So people must know that sex workers do have the same rights as any other human being in the world. So you can refuse people, and you only have sex with people that you want to allow in as your customer. Usually sex workers charge €50 for, say, a short basic time that can be 10 to 15 minutes, sometimes a little shorter, sometimes a little longer. Sometimes they make the customers choose between straight sex and a blowjob, and sometimes they give a little of both. They can choose whatever they want to. I mean the sex workers and not the customers. Of course the customers can ask whatever they want to, but that doesn't mean that they can also get it, you know, they're not in charge. But sex workers choose their own way of working, so they can offer whatever they please. They are self-employed. You know, as a window prostitute, you are your own boss.
Just a short clip to show you the ideal image of the red light district. If you walk through the red light district, you might not see it at first, but it is divided in certain areas, and you have these special groups. The minimum age is 18, even though some cities have 21 as a minimum age to work as a sex worker. And one of the funny things I have heard from students that asked me basically, and it was also one of my ideas, that older women, like when you are above 40, there's no place for you behind the windows, or you cannot work as a sex worker. But the older women are the most popular basically, because they have a steady client base, they have more experience, and basically people know them well, they know the area well, they have good contact mostly with the window owners, like the brothel owners. So there is a market for older women, and not everyone is interested in the young girls. There are different races also in the red light district. You have the Eastern European women, you have the Latin American women, the Dutch women, the Asian women, even though you don't see the Asian women that much behind the windows. They work in the massage saloons. And there are some African women as well. And during the years, you could see some shifting and changes when it comes to the groups of women and their countries of origin. And there are special groups. Those are the men, male sex workers, and also the transgenders. And the transgenders are really popular as well. And I think they are beautiful because they look amazing, stunning. But they are popular as well because sex buyers, they go for a special experience, like a different experience. So you might not think that, but that special group get a lot of clients. We have the red light district, of course, known for sex work. But sex work, it's a lucrative business, and it doesn't happen only in the red light district. In the Netherlands, we even have sex farms, and they are mostly in the rural areas. And you can drive up to a discreet farm for a night of fun or a weekend of fun. And you can go by yourself as a single, but you can also go by yourself as a couple. And it's well organized. They are licensed. Yeah, it's like a club, but then up north, for example, in the Netherlands, and not in the cities. We also have sex clubs through the whole country. Also licensed, of course. There's a lot of supervision by the police, and there are strict house rules. And mostly in a sex club, you have like this entrance and a bar, and then the sex worker has a drink with a client, and after the agreement, they go up to a room. And they have numerous rooms. You have different sex clubs. Basically, if you want, I mean, everything you would like to do, it's possible in there. And then we have the escort services for both males and females. And what I noticed is that the male escort service is more expensive than the female. You have different price ranges, of course. But if you would like to have the male experience as a woman, you would have to pay at least 50 euros more for a night with a male sex worker. But unfortunately, it's not all that bright. We have the Redlight District, the clubs, the farms, escort services, but we also have what I call the Monensteeg. I will tell you more about that. Human trafficking and racial division. There's this town called, and I'm sorry if there are any Hungarian people in the room, don't mind my pronunciation, but it's called Nyíregyháza Street in the Monensteeg. That's the particular street in Amsterdam. And Hungary is known as the Bangkok of Europe, because a lot of women, a lot of sex workers are coming from there. And there's this street that are only sex workers from that city. So not everyone knows, like when they come from Hungary, that this is the work that they have to do under these conditions. But it's really known that if people go to Western Europe from Hungary and from this particular city, that this is the work they're gonna do. And unfortunately not under the best circumstances, but yeah, it's out in the open. And in this street, the Monensteeg, that's where you can find a full street with girls that are from there. Then we have human trafficking. In the clip, the woman said that sex workers can work and they can do everything under their own conditions, their own wishes, and they don't have to open the door for everyone. It's voluntary based. But unfortunately, that's not always the case. You have women behind the windows that are forced to work. They are forced to work a lot of hours. They are forced to work for not that much money, and they don't get to spend the money they earn. They have to give it back to their exploiter, and they get sort of allowance to pay for the basic needs, some food and some money to send back home to their children or to spend it the way they want. And I've also seen a lot of racial division, unfortunately. When we think of sex work, and also what I saw in the shelter, when people think of sex workers, they think of Dutch women, Eastern European women, but I've also seen a lot of women come from Africa or Brazil, Latin America, or Asia, and there's not that much attention for these women, for this group. And I don't know why, but there's this certain stereotype of the sex worker, and a lot of attention when it comes to campaigns or projects. A lot of attention goes to the standard sex worker, and not this woman from Nigeria who can speak up for herself and doesn't fit this image. So unfortunately, it happens. I've also seen it when it comes to the police. Sometimes it did happen that they didn't take the African or other women that serious about their story, their trafficking story. Now we're going to talk about the Dutch pragmatism, which is really good if you ask me, but when it comes to this topic, not always helpful. You can see I've wrote down common good versus individual care. And the first time I have noticed that in the Netherlands we're battling with this, let me say Amsterdam, that Amsterdam is battling with this, was when I worked at the shelter for the homeless drug users. Because there was a user room and they were free to use their drugs. And I worked at a place where they could only smoke, but you also had a user room when they could use the needles. And the reason why they built this facility for them to use inside was to keep them off the street, so they didn't harass people, tourists wouldn't see them that often, they didn't cause any trouble. So instead of let the police step up more, even though they did, they just made sure that for the common good, they just build a place for them where they could do everything that God forbid. And it wasn't that visible for outsiders. And that's what you can also see in the projects that the government or the city council tried to set up. And the first project is project 1012, and 1012 is the area code of the Redlight District. Project 1012 started in 2007, and because the city council, they noticed that the police enforcement wasn't enough to control and to handle the problems in the Redlight District. And they came up with a plan to close 40% of the windows. So they started with 482 windows, and eventually 192 windows were left. And they bought those windows from the owners, and all this free space, they made restaurants with it. They closed coffee shops to make restaurants or souvenir stores. And they also restored like monumental buildings to make the site more attractive for tourists and also for the people that live in that area. Project 1012 is still going on, actually. And they did a pretty good job, but there's a lot of more work to do because closing the windows doesn't solve the problems like that. And now that a lot of women are driven away from that area, they're going to do sex work in different areas where there's no view, there's no sight, and also more trouble. Then you have my red light project. My red light project started 2 years ago, 2015, I'm sorry. Started a bit later, and that is a window brothel situated in the red light district, and it's developed and run by sex workers, and they can influence their renting conditions and also their working circumstances. So it's run by sex workers themselves. And recently, my red light project, they did an evaluation, and they came to the conclusion that it's not as successful as they hoped, because they didn't give the sex workers the voice they wanted and the voice they needed. So a lot of plans came from at the top, the city council, but sex workers didn't have that much influence that was needed to make sure that they could do their work the way they wanted and the way is best for them. And then you have Het Zandpad in Utrecht. And here at the picture you can see the current situation. Het Zandpad was an area where there were windows where women could work. But then in 2013, the windows were closed. A lot of windows were closed in that area because there were a lot of suspicions about human trafficking in that area. So they gave the women or the sex workers, they gave them a temporary place, boats, to do the work. With the idea to rebuild the area, to make it safer. But unfortunately, in 2017, the city council, they couldn't find the right sponsors, and they decided to not follow the new plan through. So basically, this is the current situation still. So besides all those initiatives from the city, from the government, a lot of things are still going on, and you can't protect what you can't see. And I'm going to show you some slides about where sex work also happens. For example, from home, a lot of women, men work from home. There's also a lot of exploitation in houses, and it's difficult to track because, for example, the women that came into the shelter and who were exploited in a house, they don't even know the city, they don't know the address, they don't know where. When they were about to press charges, all the information they could give was the room was yellow and his name was Piet, for example. So it's difficult to track that because it happens, it could be your neighbor and no one really knows how often it happens and under which conditions. What you see here is a storage room from a building of apartments. And this was a trend a couple of years ago, like a major trend, where mostly minor girls were forced to have sex in those storage rooms. And they would get alcohol or small amounts of money as a reward. It still happens, but there's more awareness amongst the people that live there, but also the police. And in certain neighborhoods, there's more surveillance. So it's not that popular anymore, though we still know that it happens under the worst conditions. And then exploitations via websites. This is kinky.nl. It's a popular website known for sex workers to offer their services. But I wanted to draw your attention to the availability of this girl, because you can see that she's available 7 days a week, almost, not almost, every moment of the day. That's not normal. We work 8 hours, maybe 12 hours if you have a really busy job, but you should be free once in a while. And if you see ads like this and availability, you should already know that something is not right. It shouldn't. It's not okay. And the police scans these websites often also. And this is one of the things they look at. Let's see. You can see, for example, her services, but you also have these ads where people say that they can do everything. That's also not normal. And then another trend that has came up with the trend of the smartphones is sexting and grooming. We have lover boys, so-called lover boys, and I don't know if this term, if it's really familiar over here, but in Europe, and especially the Netherlands, it is. And a lover boy is an exploits his or her victim by creating a certain relationship, a certain dependency, and mostly it is a guy or a girl, mostly guys. They're starting a romance, a relationship with this girl, and they're giving her a lot of gifts, take her out, do a lot of fun stuff, and eventually she has to pay him back because he has debts and he doesn't know where to get the money from. So he grooms her slowly into having sex with others. And it can be his friends, it can be friends of his friends. And what you see is that they get threatened, they get filmed, blackmailed, and the material they have, they can send it to family or post it on a website. And that's how they keep this girl in a circle. There are also lover girls, by the way, so it's not only guys. And the lover girls were usually also a victim, but they raise in their status when they are grooming themselves. So, a short map of where prostitution is legalized and or regulated in Europe. It already says that the green countries, it's legal and regulated. In the blue countries, prostitution is legal, but not you can't have brothels. The yellow countries, it's illegal to buy sex, but legal to sell sex. And above you can see Norway and Sweden. I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that. And the countries that are red, of course, everything is illegal. So above you can see Sweden. And in Amsterdam, they tried to play a bit with the Swedish model. Because in Sweden, the focus is on the buyer, the sex buyer. And they say that it's unreasonable to also criminalize the one who, at least in most cases, is the weaker party, who is exploited by others who want to satisfy their own sexual desires. So it's illegal to pay for casual sex relations, even though it's being offered. And the penalty is a fine or imprisonment for a maximum of 1 year. And the sex buyer, they have all these programs for sex buyers, usually men. They have these groups. You have social workers focused in counseling sex buyers. So they see it as a crime, but they offer a lot of help as well, because they think you can recover from it and learn how to handle and not to buy sex. And they did an evaluation in 2015, 2016, and they thought at first that if you build this model, if you create this model, that it's not possible or it's illegal to buy sex, that selling sex would go down as well. Unfortunately, that didn't happen. So there's going to be a new evaluation, I don't know when, but they're still figuring out how to deal with the sex workers that are still there. Because even though it's illegal to buy, they can still offer, and people find creative ways to still get what they want to buy, basically. And this model, it stays a Swedish model. It will never be a Dutch model, that's for sure. But the government, they tried to play with it a little bit and to see what we can learn from them and what they can learn from us. Yeah, why not in the Netherlands? A Swedish model, what I told before, the Netherlands is known for its liberalism and its pragmatism. And it's also a part of the Dutch culture. I've been to many countries in the world, and if they hear Amsterdam, the first thing they say is, oh, the Redlight District and weed. That's what we're known of. So it's difficult to throw that away or to erase that, because it has such a long history. And you're also stuck with the legislation, of course, because it's by law. It's a legal profession. So how do you want to change that? It's not something that happens in a couple of months or a couple of years. And we also have open borders with Europe, of course. And that makes it difficult to regulate and difficult to track how many women, how many sex workers come over to work in the Netherlands. But the most important reason why I think, and why other professionals think they won't use the Swedish model, is because it brings in a lot of money. Because in the Redlight District, you have coffee shops, you have museums of sex, there's a lot of weed, and also a lot of tourists. And tourists, they buy a lot and they bring in a lot of money. So even if they don't go to a sex worker, I mean, they go for a drink, they go for something to smoke, they eat in that area. So there's a lot of money going on. It's not only the windows, it's not only the sex workers. You have to look at the whole area in total. What I have heard, and that was last week, a couple of days before I flew over here, is that our new, like the city, they decided to cancel or to restrict the tours, like the tours pass through the windows, like through the Redlight District, because now everyone can offer a tour and everyone can sign in for a tour, and it's all fun. You have a lot of, how do you call those parties? When you're about to get married, but you're not? Bachelor parties, thank you. A lot of bachelor parties, both men, women. It's all fun, they're all loud, and it's actually really annoying, but for them it's nice. But they want to restrict it. So no free tours, no drugs and alcohol, no pictures taken of sex workers, which happens a lot as well. No loud music with boom boxes, and not more than 20 people. And again, the people who go on a tour like that, they have to pay taxes over the money, like the price of the tour. So the city, they try to reduce all the tours, and that's something I heard just last week. So I don't know how it's going to work out from January 2020, but they are working on it. And last but not least, I want to tell you a bit more about shelter and the non-governmental initiatives. There are a lot of shelters around the Redlight District, and not only in Amsterdam, but also Redlight districts where sex workers can work through the Netherlands. Some of them are subsidized by the government. Others are kind of operating on their own. There are a lot of churches involved as well who give money for them to exist. And in the Redlight District, you have PNG. PNG stands for Prostitution and Healthcare, and that's an organization that helps the sex workers. So not the people who want to quit the job, but the people who are willing to work but want to do it by good standards and good working conditions. And they can get language courses, medical health checks for STDs. They can get their supplies over there to do their job. There's also a lot of police, of course, a lot of police officers that are really well known by the sex workers as well, who go by the windows. On the right, you can see Not for Sale. That's an organization that operates in the Redlight District as well. And they offer meals to the girls, because the food you can buy over there is mostly junk food, fries and all those sweet stuff. It's not healthy at all. So they make soup and salads for the girls, and they pass by the window and they can place their order, and it doesn't cost a lot of money for this kind of healthy food. And there are also a lot of educational and work programs for the women who are there, mostly focused on learning the language, self-defense classes. They can go to school. So there are a lot of initiatives going on to help the women whenever they are ready and in which way they want. So that was basically my presentation. Thank you. And if there are any questions, please ask. I like to talk.
Does this work? Yes. I will walk around and, yes.
You mentioned the word sex workers, the union. Can you elaborate on that a little more?
Yeah, the union is called Proud. And it's a union based on their circumstance, like their work circumstances. It exists of all the members are sex workers themselves, or people who used to work as a sex worker. And they stand up for their rights, and they're also trying to give them a louder voice or a platform to talk. Because even though the city council and the mayor, they are willing to listen to sex workers, they always have these ideas that are perfect on paper, but in reality they don't actually work the way they would like to. So the main goal of the union is to give them a voice, to give all of them a voice, to unite them and to make sure that they can tell how they see it and how they would like it.
What happens to the children?
The children of the women?
Yeah.
For the women behind the windows or the women? Well, what you have two types of situations. Or they look after each other's children. If one works a shift from, let's say, 5 till 9, and the other works from 9 till 12, then they look after each other's children. But what you also see a lot is that the children are in the country of origin. And what they do is they send the money they earn to their children over there. So there are no children hidden under the bed or in their neighborhood, no.
So we have a different term. It's a little less kind than I think it was lover boy you described. Here in the States, they're known as pimps. Mm-hmm. My question is, do you have an idea of the percentage of slave trade going on, and also in terms of assaults to the women involved in the sex work?
Well, there are some estimations, but they think that 80% of the sex workers is not working on a voluntary base. So there are different numbers, and it's difficult to say what is right, but the estimation is that at least 80% is on a non-voluntary base.
And the other question was about assault, right? So assault. How is that tracked, or how is...
Yeah, the assault is really difficult to track because it's not only physical violence, like physical assault, but what the tactics, like the exploiter, sorry, they usually use psychological violence. So if a girl, if he or she doesn't work, then exploiter will tell her family she's not worth to do anything else. And if they know what she's doing at home, she will never be accepted. So it's mostly psychological violence, and if that doesn't work, or to make their point even more, that's when they start using physical violence, basically. But it's really difficult to track, because when it comes to physical violence, you can see evidence. People have marks or bruises, but psychological violence keeps women and men from talking to the police, because in their mind they're indoctrinated and they don't know what the consequences are. And what they also hear a lot is that the police in the Netherlands is corrupt. You can't trust them. And in some Eastern European countries, you can't trust the police. That's a fact. And they mostly tell the women that it's the same situation over here in the Netherlands. So you shouldn't go to the police because they're going to arrest you and put you out of the country.
My question is, who owns the houses, the windows, and is the city or the government has any say in who gets to sell the women?
Who owns the houses or the windows? Well, there are a lot of well-known, famous people with a lot of money in Amsterdam. And most of them used to be criminals who earned their money with the trafficking of drugs, like drugs. But they are rich and they have a lot of property. And the city of Amsterdam, they started to buy some of the windows when they started Project 1012 from them. But of course you can't buy everything, but they know who are behind it. And mostly one person has multiple windows. So it also stays their property because they earn a lot of money.
As a social worker, what did you actually do for these people?
The sex workers? What I did in the shelter?
Yeah, what contribution did you make for these people as a social worker?
Well, at first, all the people who were brought in the shelter, they were brought by the police, and they were under this law that protects victims of human trafficking, and it's called the B8.3 law, which gives them the right for a shelter, medical care, and a lawyer. And what I did, it's difficult to describe because I did basically everything. Like made sure they got in contact with their lawyer, prepare them for their talk with the police because some of them wanted to press charges. If they wanted to stay, I was in contact with the immigration service to make sure that all the paperwork was done and they would get their temporary permit. And if they get a temporary permit at first, but after that, if everything, their whole procedure goes well, they can get a permit for 5 years. And after the 5 years, they can have like the Dutch nationality and a Dutch passport. So that's one side, talking to other professionals, but I also work together with other organizations, for example, Not for Sale, to give them a job or at least work to do outside. It was mostly on a voluntary base, of course, but sometimes women found work, like paid work. So we did everything. Like if they were pregnant and they came into the shelter, you would have to arrange everything for the baby, for them. They always saw us as family, like mothers, like the one who arranged everything for them, because when they come in, they have basically nothing. And you have to start from scratch and figure out in each separate situation what is best. We also had women who wanted to go back to their country of origin, and that's when I had to talk to organizations as IOM, and that's an international organization for migration, to make sure that they were able to go back as well, and to make sure that they would go to a shelter there, or if they went to family, that they had a plan at least. So we did a lot.
What proportion of the sex trade is controlled by organized crime?
I don't have hard numbers, but I would say a lot, like most of it. Most of it. There are groups, Eastern European operating groups, but also Dutch groups, for example. But it also happens in Africa, and then especially in Nigeria. So it's difficult to give hard numbers when it comes to what proportion it is, but unfortunately it's a lot. But they operate in many places, and groups can be really. They can be large, they can be big.
You mentioned that in Sweden they made it illegal to purchase sex in '99, was it? I was just wondering, and you said it wasn't very effective, so I was wondering if the amount of sex work did go down, or in this case I'm not sure if it would be considered to be prostitution, if it's illegal, and how would they even track that if it is illegal?
How they track that?
How would they track how much sex work occurs if it is illegal?
Yeah. Well, I don't really know how they track that, but I can tell you that the amount of sex workers didn't go down. That's why they did this evaluation in 2015, and they had to conclude, unfortunately, that the situation under the sex workers didn't change, even though they had this new law. So, to be honest, I don't know how they are going to change that between 2015 and now, but they were hoping for a positive change, but that didn't really happen when it came to sex workers, only for the sex buyers, of what they could track. Sorry?
So you want to know if it's still called sex work, if it's illegal, or if it's then called prostitution, like the two terms?
Yeah, it's called prostitution, but I don't, personally, I don't call it prostitution because it's a legal job. And prostitution has this negative sound to me, so I always talk about sex work. But it's like other organizations, other people, they still use prostitution.
Yep.
So what's the rate of drug use among sex workers, and how does the tolerance of drug use impact sex work?
When it comes to soft drugs, I mean, you can use that. That's pretty normal in Amsterdam. The rate of drug use is high. There are no hard numbers, unfortunately, but we do know that a lot of women use drugs to handle, to maintain the work, especially if it happens under bad circumstances, or if they are forced, or they get drugs offered. And at a certain point, it's difficult to refuse because it gets too hard. So, and if you see that other girls are doing it, or other guys are doing it, and they can earn more money by using drugs, then they're more willing to accept it. But that's also pretty high.
Thank you. Can you tell me what the exit path is for a sex worker? You know, how would they leave the profession?
It starts, they can use different ways. They can go to the police, and the police can bring them to either a shelter or a non-governmental organization that helps them. Sometimes they help themselves. Sometimes there are previous sex workers that stay in contact with the ones that are still doing the job, and they help themselves. They could have been brought by the police to the shelter to get out of it. There are a lot of programs for them to, if they want to stop, to let them stop. And the tactics are schooling the women, making them more, like they give them self-defense classes, making them less vulnerable, providing them a work, for example, other work. So there are different ways for them to step out, but the easiest way, what I would say, is through the police, or if one of the organizations passes by the window. You can, I mean, it's really easy, they are really easy to approach. So if someone says, okay, it's not going well, or I want to stop, that can be arranged pretty easy.
Okay, we'll do 2 more questions, maybe.
I have a very different question. It's about Queen Beatrix. When she was younger, as princess, she visited the Red Light when she was incognito. And I think it was together with Salvation Army. Is the Salvation Army still actively involved?
Yes, they are.
And the current not the White House, but the house, the Royal House in the Netherlands, are they expressing any kind of interest or support or any other?
No, at least not that I know of. No.
The royal family stays out of the discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
I was wondering if you could, what is your earliest memory of the Red Light District, and how would you explain sex work to a child?
My earliest memory was when I was 18, basically. My parents didn't bring me to the Red Light District, and they also never told me about it. When I started at the Rainbow Group, the shelter isn't too far from the Redlight District. It's really close to Central Station, Amsterdam. And I wanted to know where my clients went to do their business, like to score drugs or to sell drugs, because I always saw them coming in and going out. So one of my colleagues, we decided to just explore the area, and I didn't know anything about how sex works, how it went over there, or what was really going on. But I just wanted to see where they would hang out. So I was pretty old, and how I would explain sex work to children is that's a really interesting question. I would say that a woman or a man decides to use sex as a method to earn money, but I would always explain it at first in a way that it happens because the person wants to do it, him or herself. And if my child has any other questions, then we can talk about human trafficking and all those stuff. But at first, I would explain it as a profession. Just like I chose to be a social worker, this person chose to do that. Yeah.
Oh. Thank you. So I saw so many more hands up, so we are ending the question session right now, but there is a reception following, and so everybody can, ask more questions while we have a drink and a bite. So again, for the Dutch students in the language program, there's a sheet outside. Okay, thank you all for being here.